Imagine your life trapped in an endless cycle of pain, being forced into a brutal marriage, losing everyone you loved, and still finding the strength to choose forgiveness over hatred. This is not fiction, but the poignant reality of Saint Rita of Cascia, the woman who transformed the deepest agony into unforgettable miracles. She was a true force of nature, an indomitable soul who never bowed before adversity. Prepare to dive into the saga of this giant of faith. A journey that begins with a suppressed vocation, endures an imposed marriage, devastating losses, and culminates in one of the most beautiful and miraculous stories of sainthood. What you are about to discover about the life of Saint Rita of Cascia will prove to you that no problem is too great for faith, and that when suffering is surrendered, it can be the most sublime path to holiness. The story of Saint Rita of Cascia blossoms in 1381. Amidst the serene hills of Rocca, Porena, Italy. Her arrival was a divine gift to her parents, Antonio and Amata, already elderly and without hope of having children. From a young age, Rita was no ordinary child. While others played, she was already dedicating herself to prayer and fasting, driven by deep devotion. Her greatest dream, a burning flame in her heart, was to dedicate herself entirely to God, becoming a nun, a true bride of Christ. However, in the 14th century, a woman's destiny was rarely a personal choice. Concerned about their daughter's future, her parents had other plans. Security, social status, and tradition spoke louder than Rita's vocation. Thus, she was promised in marriage to Paolo Mancini, a man far from being a prince charming. Paolo was known for his explosive temper, his violence, and his irascibility. Rumors of his brutality echoed throughout the village. Imagine Rita's anguish. Her heart, which yearned for the peace and silence of a convent, was now forced to face the storm of an arranged marriage. She knew she would not just be a wife, but a missionary within her own home. With unshakable faith, Rita accepted this mission, transforming her marriage into a penance, a living sacrifice to God, without despair or rebellion. The years with Paolo were a daily martyrdom, long nights, incessant tears. Humiliated, assaulted, and disrespected, Rita responded to every act of violence with supernatural calm, a patience that only divine grace can bestow. She did not retaliate hatred with more hatred, but with the silent and transformative power of forgiveness and unconditional love. She prayed tirelessly, offering every humiliation to God and pleading for her husband's conversion. This was her toughest battle, a spiritual war fought within the walls of her home. What seemed impossible finally happened. After years of unwavering prayer and patience, Paolo Mancini's stony heart began to yield. Rita's relentless kindness touched him in a way that violence never could. He repented of his sins, changed his behavior, and the home that was once a battlefield finally found peace. Paolo converted and became a better man, but a saint's life is rarely made of easy victories. Destiny, relentless, reserved a new and even more painful tragedy. Peace was a mirage, and death was lurking, ready to turn Rita's life upside down. The fragile peace achieved in Rita's home was brutally shattered. Paolo Mancini, now a transformed man, was ambushed and murdered by his old enemies. The blow was devastating. Rita was alone again, a widow with a broken heart, but her pain would deepen further. Her two sons, now orphans, inherited more than just grief, a burning desire for revenge. In that era, the law of talion, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, was a social requirement. For them, family honor would only be restored with blood. Rita's mother's heart was at war. She saw the cycle of violence repeating, but now involving her own children. The anguish was unbearable. Raised with love and patience, they were consumed by hatred. Rita knew that if they followed this path, they would lose their souls and perhaps their lives. Every word of hatred, every plan of vengeance they expressed, tore at Rita's heart. It was then that she made the most difficult and courageous prayer of her life. Amidst tears and pleas, she asked God to take the lives of her sons before they committed the sin of murder. This prayer is the supreme proof of her love for God and for them, preferring a mother's grief to seeing them walk the path of eternal damnation. What seemed like another impossible request was once again answered. Shortly thereafter, her 2 sons fell ill, and after forgiving their father's murderers and asking God for forgiveness, they passed away. Rita found herself completely alone, without a husband, without children, without the family she had built. What for many would be the end of the line, for Rita was a new beginning, free from the ties of the world. She was ready to fulfill the vocation that God had planted in her heart since childhood. Her only desire now was to enclose herself in the convent and completely surrender to God. But the path to religious life was more complicated than she imagined. The convent doors were closed, and the life of a widow was considered an obstacle. With a peaceful heart, but a soul empty of grief, Rita sought out the convent of the Augustinian sisters in Cascia to fulfill her childhood dream, to dedicate her entire life to God. She approached the imposing gate, feeling a mixture of hope and anxiety. However, the path to religious life was not open to her. 3 times she knocked on the convent door, and 3 times she heard the same cold and definitive answer: no. The reason: the strict rules of that era did not permit the entry of a woman who had already been married, no matter how unquestionable her virtue. The life of a widow was considered an obstacle. She, who had overcome the violence of her husband and the loss of her children, now faced the closed door of her own vocation. But Rita did not give up. Her faith was not one that yields to the first obstacle. She stepped away from the gate and knelt, making a fervent appeal, not to the sisters, but directly to her beloved saints. Saint John the Baptist, Saint Augustine, and Saint Nicholas of Tolentino. She pleaded with them to intercede for her, to open the door that men had closed to her. She prayed and cried, and in her prayer, she did not ask for the gate to open, but for God to give her the strength to understand His will, whatever it might be. She was ready to accept the refusal, if that was God's will. But God had a greater plan, and the miracle happened. On a dark and cold night, as Rita prayed in deep ecstasy, something extraordinary occurred. It is said that the 3 saints lifted her and carried her through the air, transporting her through the convent walls, directly into the inner courtyard. There, the other sisters found her in a state of ecstasy, kneeling in prayer. The main gate of the convent was locked from the inside, and no one could explain how Rita had entered. The nuns, shocked and witnesses to such an evident miracle, had no choice but to accept her. The impossible had become a reality. The rejected widow was finally home, in the place where she had always been called. Finally inside the convent, Rita believed that peace had arrived. But God had a greater plan, and an even more intense test of love was yet to come. Once in the convent, Rita's life did not become a refuge of rest. On the contrary, she embraced penance with fervor, seeking to unite herself more and more with the passion of Christ. Her soul longed for a different kind of suffering than what she had experienced. She wanted to share the pain of Jesus on the cross, not as a punishment, but as a proof of love and union with her Savior. In one of her most intimate prayers, she implored God, "Lord, increase my pain and increase your love." She did not ask to be free from pain, but to feel the pain of Christ, to immerse herself in His sufferings for the salvation of humanity. And her request was answered in a dramatic and visible way. It is said that one day, as Rita prayed in ecstasy before a crucifix, meditating deeply on the suffering of Jesus, a thorn from Christ's crown detached itself and flew towards her, embedding itself in her forehead. The wound that opened was not superficial. It was deep, painful, and exuded an odor so strong that the other sisters had difficulty approaching her. It was a constant pain, a physical mark of her spiritual union with Jesus. This suffering accompanied her for 15 long years. This wound was not a punishment, but a gift, a wound of love. It was the visible proof of her extreme devotion, a way for God to honor her unwavering faith. Rita accepted the pain with humility and gratitude. She knew that this suffering directly united her to Jesus' sacrifice for all humanity. She did not ask for the wound to heal. Instead, she offered it every day as a sacrifice. The pain was a constant reminder of her love for Christ and her desire to be closer to Him. During these years, Rita became the sister of the thorn. The physical pain was so intense that she was often isolated from the other sisters. However, her soul was in constant communion with God. She did not complain, but rather found joy in her suffering. for she knew she was participating in Christ's mission. And Rita's sanctity was not manifested only in her pain. From her unwavering faith, miracles began to blossom, proving that life sprouts even in the most arid land. Saint Rita of Cascia's life was drawing to a close. Sick, weakened, and with the unhealing wound on her forehead, she was confined to her cell in her last days. One day, her cousin, who had come from Rocca Perenna, visited her. As she was leaving, her cousin asked Rita if she wished for anything from her old home. With a serene smile, Saint Rita made a seemingly absurd request. "Bring me a rose and 2 figs from my garden." Her cousin was surprised, almost disbelieving. The request was, in fact, impossible. It was the middle of a harsh Italian winter, and Rita's family garden was completely covered in snow and ice. There was no chance of finding a flower or ripe fruit. Nevertheless, moved by love and curiosity, her cousin decided to go to the house. Arriving there, she was met with the expected scene: a frozen and inhospitable landscape covered by a thick layer of snow. However, her disbelief turned to astonishment when, amidst the icy expanse, she spotted a rose bush. And it wasn't just a bush. A single vibrant and perfect red rose had bloomed amidst the snow, exuding a fragrance that was not of this world. But the surprise didn't stop there. As she looked at the rose, she remembered the figs. She walked to the fig tree, which should have been completely dry and lifeless, and there, to her utter surprise, she found 2 ripe, sweet, and fresh figs, as if it were a summer's day. Her cousin picked the rose and the figs and rushed back to the convent, her heart pounding. Upon seeing the fruits and the flower, Saint Rita smiled, knowing that this miracle was a confirmation of her faith. The rose became a symbol of her love and purity, which blossomed even amidst difficulties. The figs represent the sweetness of her life and the reward of her perseverance. This miracle is living proof that for God, nothing is impossible, and that faith can make life flourish even in the coldest and most difficult moments. Rita's life ends, but her power does not. Her story becomes a beacon of hope, and her ability to intercede for us, those who face the so-called impossible causes, continues to surprise the world. Finally, Saint Rita of Cascia's earthly journey came to an end. On May 22nd, 1457, she departed to the Father's house, leaving behind a physical body that was frail, but a soul that was stronger than ever. The moment of her death was marked by divine signs. It is said that the church bell of Cascia began to ring on its own, and a sweet, gentle perfume, like that of roses, emanated from her room, filling the convent and announcing the arrival of a new saint in heaven. And what happened next was a new and grand miracle. Her body, instead of decomposing, remained incorrupt. Throughout the centuries, her body has remained preserved, a living testament to her sanctity and God's grace. To this day, the body of Saint Rita of Cascia rests in a glass reliquary in Cascia, Italy, with the skin of her face and hands intact, an invitation for the world to witness the power of faith. The miracles did not stop with her death. Her life story, marked by losses, pains, and overcoming adversity, led devotees who turned to her to begin receiving graces and having their pleas answered, especially in situations that seemed hopeless. Because of her life of suffering, patience, and unwavering faith, Saint Rita became the advocate of impossible causes, the saint to whom we turn when all seems lost. Her story is a beacon of hope, proof that the greatest victory is not to avoid suffering, but to transform it into love, forgiveness, and holiness. The pain of marriage, the grief of losing her family, and the stigma of the thorn were not the end for her, but the path to glory. Have you ever felt lost, facing an impossible cause? The life of Saint Rita proves to us that no problem is too big for faith. What is your impossible cause today? Let us know in the comments. And if you're seeking more stories of saints who defied logic and became beacons of faith, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. In our next video, we'll dive into the fascinating story of Saint Anthony, the saint who lost everything and became history's most famous matchmaker saint. Thank you for watching, and may Saint Rita intercede for your impossible causes, today and always.